Good morning. Thank you for joining us. We are being streamed live on Facebook. My name is Justin Viller with the Committee of 70. We are very excited in the first of our hopefully multiple interviews through our student candidate interview series through Studio C70. We are excited to have Congresswoman Mary Gay Scanlon representing Pennsylvania's 5th Congressional District join us today with the Baldwin School out in Bryn Mawr in Montgomery County. And Dr. Athen Biss's class will be asking questions of the Congresswoman who is running for re-election. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Biss. And thank you very much, Congresswoman Scanlon, for being here this morning. Really appreciate it.
Happy to be here.
Thank you. I'm going to toss it to my students. Go ahead, Layla.
Okay. Hi, my name is Layla. I'm a junior and I live in Marion Station. And our first question has 3 parts. So it's first, how did you get into politics? Was it in high school, college, or after? And then also, was there anyone specific that inspired you?
Good question. I did not get into politics until later. I don't recall ever running for a school office or anything, but I became a lawyer, practiced in Philadelphia, and was working at the Education Law Center of Pennsylvania, which is dedicated to getting a good public school education for every kid in the Commonwealth. It's the organization that sued the Commonwealth a few years back and ended up getting a declaration that the Commonwealth's funding system for public schools is unconstitutional because it disadvantages students who live in poorer zip codes. So I was working there, and one of the big things we were working on is making sure that parents are involved in their schools. I ended up being on our home and school association for my kids' elementary school. And then there was kind of a botched construction project, and I ended up running for school board as a result. So it was, a direct outgrowth of my interest in schools and education, and then the impact that occurred in our local school system. So I do think that's how a lot of people end up getting engaged. They're involved in something, that particularly touches home, and then from there it leads to other things. I think I missed some of your parts to the question, though. Let me know if I did.
Was there anyone specific that inspired you?
Yeah, in some ways. I think just before, actually, after I ran for school board, I served for about a decade on our local school board and thought I was done with politics. But in the interim, I had the opportunity to meet some folks, some women who were serving in office. One was Maggie Hassan, who's now the senator for New Hampshire, yes. And she had gotten involved in politics because she had a child with a disability, and so ended up being an advocate for her own child, then helping other parents advocate. Then she ended up in the state legislature. Then she ended up as a governor, and now she's in the US Senate. So she followed a very similar path to many of the parents I'd worked with at the Education Law Center, starting out advocating for her own kid and then spreading it out. So I met her and thought to myself, wow, if I didn't live in such a big state, maybe I would have thought of something like this as well. And then I also had the opportunity, I was working at a national law firm organizing their public interest work. I had the opportunity to meet the woman who ran the legal services program in Las Vegas, Nevada. And legal services always struggle for funding, but this woman had a very well-funded legal aid operation. And it turns out that she had run for and become the Speaker of the House in Nevada. So here was someone doing similar work that I had been doing involving legal aid services for low-income folks and nonprofits, but she had run for office and had actually become very powerful in the state of Nevada, and was then able to get more resources to fund the underlying work that she was doing. So those 2 women had a big impact on me thinking, starting to plant the germ of, oh, wow, maybe I could do something more here. And then after the 2016 election, I decided that I really wanted to step up.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
Hi, my name is Naima. I'm in 12th grade, and I live in the 5th district in Ardmore. And our question that we have for you is, what plans or opinions do you have for climate related issues? And what are your plans to, and how do you plan to deal with those who oppose your ideas?
Okay. So it actually has been an exciting year or two here because we were able to pass this huge climate rescue bill a year and a half, 2 years ago. It's called the Inflation Reduction Act, but it had this huge investment in climate rescue planning. And so over the past few months, a lot of that money has been rolling out. So we've been able to see the impact start to occur. So, for example, my office has been holding information sessions so that individual homeowners can learn about the parts of that bill that provide them with tax credits and rebates when they do things to make their homes more energy efficient or swap out an older boiler or furnace for an electric furnace or heat pump or something like that. So we've been pushing the individual things that people can do, but we're also seeing more and more of kind of the organizational things. So we have government entities and nonprofits that are able to now implement solar panels. I was on top of a roof in Havertown a couple of weeks ago where a church had put solar panels on its roof because they were able to get some support to offset the cost. And now they are generating more electricity from the solar panels than they are using. And this is a church that doesn't just operate on Sundays, it also has daycare. So we're seeing that at a lot of places across our region. And then we also are starting to see rollout of electric school buses. So we celebrated that with the Philadelphia School District last week. They're transitioning their fleet to electric school buses. So all of these things that we need to do in aggregate to move towards climate change goals to try to reduce the impact. So those are kind of the forward-looking things. And that bill that we passed, it can only be a start. We need to do more. But I think having the popularity of what we're doing is going to help convince those who were naysayers. Then we've also got things where we're dealing with the challenges we already have from climate change. Places like Eastwick near the airport that have experienced increasing flooding in recent years as we've had more extreme weather events. So we've been trying to assist them to deal with the flooding that they see by helping them put in barriers and eventually kind of a dike that'll help prevent future flooding. So there's a lot that we need to do. It's kind of an all hands on deck moment. And I am concerned about those in government, in Congress, the folks who are writing things like Project 2025 that want to roll back that work and kind of rely on the goodwill of folks who are going to make money from things that might further damage the climate. So I think we need to do more, but we're pushing really hard to get implemented the things we've already been able to do.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, my name is Annie. I live in Marion Station. I'm a senior. And our third question for you is, what change in the community have you personally helped to create?
Sorry, what was that one?
Okay, what change in our community have you personally helped to create?
Okay, thank you. I guess I'd point to a couple things. We have been able over the last couple years to get access to funding for local groups through a project or a process called community project funding. So nonprofits and government entities can say, hey, we've got this project, member of Congress, can you sponsor our project? It falls within existing buckets of authorized money, but if the member of Congress endorses it, then it can bump it up in the priorities. So one of my big priorities has been tackling gun violence, which has been a huge issue across our region and across the country. And we saw a particularly alarming spike, obviously, during the pandemic. So we've been able to help both local government entities and community projects get funding to address that crisis. So in Delaware County, I was able to get $500,000 for a mobile mental health van, so that when someone calls 911 and it's for a mental health issue, they're able to send mental health professionals instead of law enforcement, because that may not be the appropriate response, instead of or in addition to. So we've seen that be a successful strategy across multiple township cities across the country. So we've been able to assist with that. There is a program that is variously known as focused deterrence or group violence intervention. That is a strategy that combines policing and community supports to reduce gun violence. So research has shown that in any given community, there's kind of a limited, very small number of actors who are likely to be involved in gun violence, either as a victim or as a shooter. So if you identify them, you can go to them and say, look, we need you to stop. We will help you get resources. We'll help you move. We'll help you get mental health. We'll help you get a job. We'll help your family. But if you don't accept the help, then we are going to prosecute you. And so we've seen that used in Chester to reduce gun violence over a 3-year period by 70%. It's being used in Philadelphia. They started small and they're expanding now, but we've seen gun violence come way down in Philadelphia. And it's actually something they used to use in Philly in like 2012, 2013. And then, like so many programs, they stopped funding it and gun violence started to climb again. But it's a really successful evidence-based program. So that's kind of one area. Another area is maternal health and maternal mortality, which is much worse in the US than in so many other countries. It's the worst among developed countries. So we've been able to get targeted money to implement a doula program in Delaware County. We've supported a birthing center in Southwest Philadelphia. So trying to target those things, even as we're passing legislation, which was introduced and supported by Vice President Harris while she was in the Senate, to do things like provide postpartum care for a full year for people on Medicaid. So those are kind of two policy-based things. But one of the things that I've been involved in for a long time is civics education, and just really liking to help young people like yourselves become engaged in the civic life of our country. So I have a congressional youth cabinet made up of high school juniors and seniors from across the district. And we meet every 4 to 6 weeks throughout the academic year and talk about policy issues and what's going on in Congress and with our elections and such. And that's just been a lot of fun. The students identify the issues that they're interested in at the beginning of the year, and then we try to bring in experts to talk about those issues, and then we culminate in the spring with a trip to DC so they can see DC in action.
Thank you, Representative.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Sana. I'm a senior and I live in Melbourne. So my question is about your views on U.S. foreign policy. So to you, what does the de-escalation of the Israel-Hamas conflict look like? And what role do you think the U.S. should play in ushering in a two-state solution?
Okay. Yeah, de-escalation is obviously the opposite of where we've been going over the past few weeks. But we obviously need de-escalation. I think that the role the U.S. can play is the role that we've been trying to play, which is to bring everybody to the table, not just Israel, Hamas, Hezbollah, but the region to the table, because we need a regional solution in order to enforce this, particularly when we have the folks who are most directly involved in the conflict not showing any signs of wanting to get to the table. Certainly permanent or durable ceasefire has not been able to be successful yet. But I think the US has played a role like this in the past. I am not an expert at Middle Eastern affairs, but I do work a lot on the Irish caucus, where 30 years ago, there was a conflict in Ireland, Northern Ireland, with people getting killed on a daily basis. And the US helped bring those warring factions together to produce the Good Friday Accord, which involve people stepping out of their traditional roles, saying, we have to have an end to the cycle of violence. We need people to come up with a path forward and a peace process. And so the US helped bring those forces together and create the Good Friday Accord, and continues to stand as a guarantor of the Good Friday Accord, which has had some challenges in recent years as the United Kingdom decided to engage in Brexit and withdraw from the European Union, which exacerbated tensions in Ireland again. So it is, we have to find a new path forward, apart from just escalating violence. And I'm hoping that the US can be helpful in doing that, but we also have to recognize that we don't control the actors on the ground.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Avery. I'm a senior. I live in Wayne. So a couple of years ago, you helped pass the Ensuring Access to Abortion Act. Could you talk a little bit about what that act is and what you're currently doing to help protect reproductive rights?
Yeah, I think we passed it through the House, but it didn't pass through the Senate, like a couple other bills that we were able to pass last term, including one called the Protecting Women's Health Act, which would reinstate the provisions of Roe v. Wade, which was basically a graduated system with respect to protecting women's freedom to choose their own health care. I think this is a central issue that we need to address. I think it was a mistake to overturn Roe v. Wade, and we've seen certainly the consequences of that overturning. But I think a really important thing to remember is that it doesn't overturn women's right to decide on their own healthcare, but it did overturn a protection for it. That Supreme Court case, Roe v. Wade, had acted as a protection. So the way we address that is to pass the Protect Women's Health Act and related legislation to make sure that women's rights are protected. So I have been a strong supporter of that. I vehemently disagree with the idea that this is an issue that can be left up to the states, because how can you say that women have rights in one state and not another? And it gets particularly bizarre when you have things like people serving in the military or being married to someone who's serving in the military and getting sent to states where they don't have the rights and freedoms that they are there to protect. So I think it's been kind of a gross distortion of our laws. And I'm very concerned about the legislation that we're seeing put forward by some of our colleagues, much of which is reflected in this Project 2025 document that would go even further and attack other rights to contraception, to IVF, that calls for tracking women's pregnancies and miscarriages. I think that's just a terrible path to go down. And we're trying to fight that in a number of different ways by passing legislation. One of the things that has become a talking point over the past year in the wake of Dobbs is access to medication abortion, which is about 60% of abortions in this country at this time. And it's early stage abortion care. But there's a Victorian law called the Comstock Act, which says you can't mail anything to do with abortion. You can't use the US mails. And so it has been posited by Justices Scalia and Alito and some of the folks on the far right that they can start enforcing the Comstock Act to deny access to medication abortion across the entire country. So some of my colleagues and I introduced a bill to repeal that portion of the Comstock Act to prevent that from going forward. But again, we need to pass it.
Yeah, thank you.
Sure.
Mia.
Hi, I'm Mia. I'm from Doylestown and I'm a junior. I'm wondering, how has your experience on the judiciary and on the Rules Committee shaped the way you view government and democracy? And are there any specific experiences that come to mind?
Oh boy, sure. So Judiciary and Rules Committee are historically very different. Judiciary has always been kind of a hot button committee with a lot of hot issues coming up. And I chose it because so many of the issues I'd worked on over time run through there, whether it was gun safety, immigration, juvenile justice reform, and especially voting rights. So those are all things that I'd worked on before going to Congress and continue to work on today. But those are issues that engender a lot of hot feelings. So there tend to be pretty spicy discussions in judiciary. Some of Congress's biggest characters end up on the committee. Mr. Jordan is currently the chair. But it also has played really important functions. So the first term I was there, first and second term, we impeached President Trump twice. Once for seeking to use his foreign policy powers to force Ukraine to dig up dirt on his political opponent, and the second time for inciting the insurrection at the Capitol. So I ran for Congress in 2018 in large part because I thought Congress needed to play a significant role as a check and balance on an out of control executive. And so, I'm really grateful to have been able to serve there. The Rules Committee traditionally has been much more staid. It is the vehicle for getting bills to the floor. And it's, until this current term, has usually been much more policy oriented, kind of procedural, some really serious debates, but not a lot of hot button issues. That did change a little bit, given the power of the Rules Committee to put bills on the floor when former Speaker McCarthy was negotiating with his caucus to get the votes he needed to become Speaker. He agreed to give 3 seats on the Rules Committee to people who were kind of flamethrowers, and that has impacted the work of the Rules Committee this term. And we've had a lot of more hot button discussions. We've had more rules fail, so there has to be a vote on a rule before the bill comes to the floor. We've had more rules fail in this Congress than in any Congress going back over a century, I believe. So it's extended dysfunction to the Rules Committee, which is a shame and I think needs to change. In terms of moments that really stuck with me, my first hearing in Judiciary Committee is probably going to stick with me forever. It was a markup of 3 significant bills to address gun violence. So this is in 2018, when the House had a gun safety majority for the first time in decades. And that was largely because of the March for Our Lives movement, which was young people, many of them high school students who couldn't even vote yet themselves, who organized in the wake of the Parkland shooting and the Las Vegas shooting to make people aware, to set goals for reducing gun violence, to get people registered to vote, and then actually get them out to vote. So we had a gun safety majority in the House. Judiciary Committee marked up bills to impose universal background checks, to close the boyfriend loophole, which involves someone who's a domestic abuser. If they're married to their victim, they could have the guns taken away. But if they weren't married to them, that was the boyfriend loophole. They could keep their weapons. And then also the Charleston loophole, which refers to a shooting in Charleston, South Carolina, where someone was able to get a weapon because of a loophole saying that if the background check wasn't completed within 3 days, then the person had to be allowed to purchase the gun they were interested in. So we have this markup with these bills, and it goes from 10 in the morning till about 10 at night. And our colleagues across the aisle, our Republican colleagues, were introducing amendment after amendment after amendment to try to gut the bill. And we fended off all that. And there were folks from March for Our Lives and Moms Demand Action, supporting us in the audience at the hearing. And it came time to call for the votes to advance the bills. And Chairman Nadler, Jerry Nadler from New York, who's been in Congress a long time, calls for the vote, and his voice cracked. And I turned around because, kind of like the old movie A League of Their Own, there's no crying in Congress. I mean, I was really surprised, but he was really emotional. And people up and down the dais were emotional because it was the first time this legislation had been able to move in decades. And there were people there with me who had run for Congress, one of them being Lucy McBath from Georgia, whose son was killed in a gas station shooting by some guy who didn't like the music that he and his friends were playing in their cars. So it was just a very emotional moment on a congressional vote, and that's going to stick with me forever.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Morning, Congresswoman. Thank you again for your time. My name is Georgia Jane, and I'm a senior from the 5th District in Haverford. And you mentioned voting rights. And so I was wondering if, as we've seen a crackdown on voting rights across the nation, and especially early voting and mail-in voting procedure become a lot more complex in Pennsylvania this election cycle, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how you intend to protect voting rights and what you've been doing for that. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you for the question. Yeah, I mean, voting is so important, and we do have a pretty strong divide right now in terms of the legislation that's being put forward. Much of it is designed to make voting easier for eligible voters, and that's what the 2019 law that was passed in a bipartisan way in Pennsylvania that would allow universal mail-in voting. That's what that was designed to do. Look, we've seen a lot of disinformation thrown up around mail-in voting, starting with the former president, but then expanding across the country. There is no evidence to show that mail-in voting is subject to fraud or to being able to, sway elections. We've been using mail-in voting in this country since the Civil War, when it was first really rolled out to allow people who were fighting in the Civil War to have their votes count. Our systems are incredibly secure. I like to say that, there's no way that Vladimir Putin can go to a Kinko's and Xerox off a bunch of mail-in ballots and turn them in, because they won't count. We have 67 counties in Pennsylvania. Each one has a slightly different system. So that lack of uniformity actually helps protect the system. There's barcodes on ballots to make sure that only one is submitted for each voter. So it's a myth, but it's a myth that is being used to try to disenfranchise voters. In Pennsylvania, in 2012 or so, there was a law passed that would require additional forms of ID in order to vote. And we've seen similar things in Congress. They've been pushing something called the SAVE Act that would require additional forms of ID in order to register to vote. We have a system, right? And the allegation is that non-citizens might vote. Every research project that has been done has been shown that non-citizens are not voting. Yes, you're going to end up with one here or there by mistake or something, but non-citizens aren't voting, in large part because they've got other concerns as they're trying to reach citizenship. Voting would prevent someone from becoming a citizen. It is actually illegal for a non-citizen to vote. They can be jailed, fined, and deported. So, and the act of voting, registering to vote, would then create a paper trail so that they could be tracked down. So it's not an issue, but as we saw when Pennsylvania had this stricter voter ID law, it does disenfranchise citizens. There was testimony produced that over 600,000 eligible voters from Pennsylvania would have been precluded from voting by the types of ID that were being required. And it really comes down to what types of ID. We've seen in other states, I think it was Texas, that had a strict voter ID law, and you could vote if you had a hunting license, but you couldn't vote with a student ID. So when you pick your forms of ID, you start to pick who the voters are. If someone is older, if they don't have a car, if they're disabled, if they were not born in a hospital, all of these are things that make it more difficult for people to get a voter ID. So the current system we have does keep non-citizens and other people who wouldn't be eligible to vote from voting, but we have to be very, very careful when we put additional restrictions on that we aren't actually disenfranchising American voters. So that's something I'm really concerned about. We have been trying for the past 6 years to reauthorize the Voting Rights Act, something that was implemented under President Johnson's administration, 1965. It has been reauthorized multiple times until the present, when all of a sudden we have folks who are basically employing modern day voter suppression tactics to keep Americans from voting. And they are the holdup in getting this reauthorization passed.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe one more question if you have time.
Sure.
Thank you.
My name is Gemma. I'm a senior and I live in Bryn Mawr. And I was wondering, what is your stance on the decriminalization of drugs? How do you see it playing out in the 5th District and Pennsylvania as a whole?
Well, we've seen Pennsylvania implement medical marijuana use. We've also seen that federal laws that have continued to keep marijuana as a Schedule I drug have impeded the ability of the states to forge their own path as science, around marijuana evolves. So it has prevented the dispensaries and the other businesses involved in implementing medical marijuana and in other states recreational marijuana from being able to use the banking system, which then creates a whole array of other issues. So I think we do need to adjust the status of marijuana and other drugs as research shows that they can be used safely for medical and other uses that weren't traditionally seen that way.
Thank you.
Okay. If I can go back to the prior question about protecting voting rights, just to kind of build upon the March for Our Lives program and other areas where young people have become engaged. We do try to promote through my office, through our Congressional Youth Cabinet, making sure that younger voters or even people who are not yet eligible to vote are helping other people to register to vote and even working at the polls, because 17 and up can work at the polls. They actually get paid a little bit for that day and can help both make sure that the polls are operating, because we have trouble recruiting enough poll workers, and being able to explain to friends, families, and neighbors on why our system works and why it's secure. So I would encourage folks to consider that on Election Day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much to both Dr. Business Class and to Congresswoman Scanlon for your time this morning. We really appreciate it. Just a reminder for those who are watching or will be watching through the Committee of 70 Interactive Voter Guide that voter registration is in less than a week, October 21st. That's our deadline. We strongly encourage you to get your mail-in ballot applications around that time too, because the application deadline for mail-in ballot is very late. It's October 29th. It doesn't give you much time before Election Day on May 5th. So get those mail-in ballot applications in sooner than that deadline. But thank you both very much this morning and happy voting.
Thank you.
You.
Thank you.